Over this last week, I participated in a 4-day-long game jam hosted by Game Maker's Toolkit. This means I had 96 hours to build a new video game from scratch based on a theme that wasn't revealed until the jam began. This theme was one word.
One word. Loop.
This isn't my first jam. I participated in my first game jam earlier this year for the Brackeys Game Jam 2025.1. The theme was Nothing Can Go Wrong. I couldn't think of any good ideas, and my brain kept thinking of a game I really like called The Escapists. A key feature from that game is trying to avoid suspicion from the guards while you plan your escape from prison. I thought this was a good interpretation of Nothing Can Go Wrong, so I basically just took that exact idea and applied it to an office worker who needs to apply to jobs without their boss or coworkers finding out. It was unfinished, it was ugly, and it was excruciatingly unfun. In the game description, I said I do not recommend playing this game. With this failure at the back of my mind, I had one primary goal for the GMTK Jam. I just wanted to make a game that I didn't hate with my entire being. The second I saw the theme, I began brainstorming. However, I am unfortunately an employed adult, and this jam goes from Wednesday morning to Sunday morning, so I needed to manage my time well to get the hours in. I came up with a few ideas that fit the theme, but nothing was sticking. I really wanted to make a game about the idea of Ouroboros, but I couldn't think of how to turn snakes eating themselves into a fun idea. Then I thought about a certain ability from the game Sonic Frontiers, the Psy Loop. It's an ability that Sonic uses to literally draw a loop around his opponents, and when the loop completes, it does damage. This made me imagine a 2D fighter game where instead of attacking using normal means, you draw loops around the enemies and that's how you do damage. It wasn't the most fleshed out idea, but I didn't have any better ones, so I decided this was good enough to prototype. Now here's the problem with prototyping. It's supposed to be a way to quickly check if your idea works and is fun, but when you're dumb as bricks like me, it takes several hours to get a bare-bones version of your idea working. And when you're an employed man in a 4-day-long game jam, several hours is a lot to lose. Nonetheless, I did manage to get my base idea working. The player follows the mouse. Then I have a line 2D sitting on the map, and every couple frames I add a new point to it while the player travels around. Then every single frame we need to calculate if the player has drawn a closed loop yet, and if they have, then we turn the line red. Then, when the player releases the mouse button, we need to find the enclosed area and add a hitbox to it. I didn't really understand these formulas for calculating line intersections and enclosed areas, so I primarily just used ChatGPT to help me, which ended up being a big mistake since I didn't understand the code at all and was effectively unable to debug this functionality for the rest of the jam. This prototype was as bare bones as it gets, and while it wasn't particularly fun, the idea was still intriguing enough to me, so I decided to double down on the idea and commit to it. After some trial and error, I created some placeholder enemies and managed to get them to take damage after they've been looped around. I also tried forcing the player to always remain at a constant speed. That sounds normal, but it's actually not very typical of games where the player follows the mouse. With more common controls, the player would come to a stop when they reach the mouse, but since they need to keep a constant speed, instead they circle around without drifting. I decided to keep this method of moving because I added a bit of a skill curve to controlling the player, and it made it so you always had to decide where to move instead of just sitting still while you think about it. Now that the player was functional, I decided to work on the enemies. I immediately thought up 3 enemy types: a basic close-range attacker, a long-range attacker, and a tank. The close-range attacker and the tank just move towards the player's current position, while the archer tries to get within a certain distance before standing still and launching arrows. I also decided on a theme. The chaotic way that the player moved made me think of a dolphin swimming really fast, so I decided to go with that. As such, I made this simple water background and I made some basic sprites for the player and the 3 types of enemies. For some reason, the water texture was super rough on the eyes, and I didn't know why, so I just dimmed it and decided to come back to it later. This is where I ended day 1. Overall, I'm quite pleased with the progress, especially since I had to work. Day 2 was my least productive day. Not only did I have to go to work again, but I had plans in the evening that I made before I remembered when this jam was happening, so I only had around 2 hours to make progress. The main thing I did was begin working on the dolphin special abilities. I didn't want the loop drawing mechanic to be the only way to attack, so I wanted to add a few more options. I added one ability that I called the dash, or the boost, that gives the player a short burst of speed and also increases their torque so they can make sharper turns. The other ability that I added I called the auto loop. Basically, it just locks in on a single enemy and loops around them a bunch of times, doing multiple damage. I also added these icons in the bottom right to show when they're able to be used, but unfortunately that's all for day 2. If you aren't picking up on the pattern yet, I also had to work on day 3. However, I at least had a free evening this time. The first thing I did was add another ability. This one I called the Shockwave, and it shoots a circle around the player that hits all nearby enemies with a stun effect. This one was super easy to implement, and I think it complements the other abilities well, since stunned enemies are easier to surround. There are two more things that I focused on for day 3, and those were waves and upgrades. Until now, I've just had a few hard-coded enemies, but we need them to attack in waves instead, so I threw together a script to do that. I store all the wave information in a JSON file, which includes a series of enemy types and the amount of each one that I want to spawn in for that wave. Then I add a flat cooldown for each enemy type so that they don't all spawn at once. This ended up being a little lackluster because if I tried to make a wave that only consisted of a single enemy type, then it could only spawn one at a time. But it was fine for the most part. In between each wave, I take each player to the upgrades menu. Here they get a few upgrade points that they can spend on upgrades to their various abilities. But unfortunately, they don't do anything quite yet. I'll have to get to that on day 4. This is the final day of the jam. I still have a lot to do, but at least I don't have to work today, so I have all day to finish the game. The first order of business was adding my final ability, the Whirlpool. For this one, the dolphin draws this circle and it creates a whirlpool that sucks nearby enemies in. This was pretty easy to implement, and I think it complements the other abilities well. Next up was finishing up the upgrades. I decided on having 3 upgrades for each ability, including the basic loop attack. For the auto loop, shockwave, and whirlpool, you also have to unlock them in the first place. Here's a list of all the upgrades if you're curious. The upgrades were actually really easy to implement. I think making this whole UI took like 3 times longer than adding in any of the actual abilities. I also added one more enemy type that I call the Wizard. The Wizard doesn't do any damage, but he shoots fireballs that can stun you and make you an open target. In hindsight, it makes no sense for a stunning attack to be a fireball, but that didn't come to mind at the time. With the upgrades complete, basically all of the functionality is working, but we still have a lot of miscellaneous features and polish to get through first. I made a short animation for the dolphin, who I decided to name Louie. I touched up the art on the tank and gave him a coat for no reason. I made a new water texture that was a lot simpler so it didn't hurt the eyes as much, and I made some super simple buoys and those ropes that connect them to act as a border. I threw some effects onto the loop line so that it doesn't look quite as boring. I added a how-to play screen with the credits menu, and lastly I also added a pause menu with some volume sliders. Besides some bug fixes, the game was basically done, but that doesn't mean I get to go to bed yet, because the game is still completely silent. This is a problem because I don't know how to compose music. I sort of play some piano in my own time, but I don't really know what I'm doing, and I've certainly never composed my own music before. But there's no time like the present. So I downloaded the free trial of FL Studio, picked a default electric piano preset, threw some sliders all over the place in hopes that it sounded good, and started placing random notes in E major until it sounded perfect. On top of the melody, I threw in a bass preset with 3 notes, and a drum preset with some random pattern, and this is what I ended up with. It's not going to fool anyone into thinking that a professional made it, but the mere fact that my eardrums aren't bleeding is a sign of success to me. I'm not going to delude myself into thinking I was going to make a masterpiece when I not only haven't done this before, but I also didn't even bother to look up a tutorial for the software. Also, right after I recorded this footage, I closed down FL Studio without thinking, with no backup, so this is what I'm stuck with regardless. I also had to create some sound effects, and for this I just used one of those sound effect generators that you can find online. We've got sounds for clicking on things, taking damage, getting stunned, using the boost, auto loop, shockwave, whirlpool, and my personal favorite, when you complete a loop. Everything is done now, so I sent off a build of the game to my brother to playtest for me, and in the meantime I wrote up my submission page on itch.io. My brother ended up liking the game, or at least enough to not shut it down immediately. His main points of feedback were to decrease the number of enemies and to make the whirlpool better. So I did exactly that, played it a few more times to confirm that I didn't catastrophically break anything, and submitted my game to the jam under the name Looping Louie, with just under 9 hours to spare. So was I successful? Did I achieve my goal of making a game that I don't hate with my entire being? Yes. Yes, I did. I'm quite happy with how this game turned out. That being said, I still have a lot that I'm taking away from this. The first and probably most important thing is that using ChatGPT to generate unreadable code for your main mechanic is a terrible idea and you shouldn't do it. My second takeaway is that I want to branch out my visual styles more. Every game that I've made or attempted to make up to this point has had the same slightly fugly pixel art style, and I think it has limited my creativity a lot. I'd like to both branch out into other art styles more, and also I want to learn how to use 3D in Godot as well. Feel free to try out the game for yourself using the link in the description. If you're curious, this is how my game ranked after the rating period was over. I don't really care though. I achieved my primary goal of not hating the game. Maybe I'll worry more about the scores next year. Thanks for watching.